Well, hello, vinyl lovers, and welcome to another episode of Groovescape. I'm your host, Josh Greenberg, and as always, I'm coming to you from my home studio in Ottawa, Canada. I'm working out of a new basement studio. If you haven't noticed the slightly different layout here, gone is the sunshine and my picture window view of the outside world. But with the loss of that view comes a loss of noise and all the distractions associated with working on the main floor of my house. Still getting used to the feel of working down here. Not quite vibing on it yet, but in part, that's a little bit why I've been quiet of late. But I'm glad to be back with a new episode. For your viewing and listening pleasure, today is March 8th, International Women's Day, which, as I hope you know, is a global day of recognition that celebrates the social, economic, political, and cultural achievements of women around the world. It's also a day of action for accelerating gender parity, and I've had a look back on my previous episodes of this podcast and realized I could do a whole lot more in terms of featuring the musical achievements of women artists. I can absolutely do a better job of that, and so with that in mind, I'm dedicating this episode to celebrating some of my favorite women musicians, singer-songwriters, pop stars, pop rockers, producers, and sound engineers. Now, the music industry is one of the oldest in which women artists have played an important, though grossly under-recognized role. Nearly every genre has its list of pioneering women artists, from gospel, soul, and R&B to rock, disco, metal, punk, and pop. Let's consider the super important influence of rap and hip-hop, just as an example. When we think about its cultural history, we often talk about trailblazers like Grandmaster Flash, the Sugar Hill Gang, Run DMC, NWA, of course Dr. Dre and Ice-T, their solo work thereafter, Kool Herc, LL Cool J, Beastie Boys, Public Enemy, not to mention the legions of legends who followed in their wake, from Eminem and 50 Cent to Jay-Z and Drake. But did you know that two of the most important original hip-hop recordings, Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five's The Message, and the Sugar Hill Gang's Rapper's Delight, were both produced by the same woman, the accomplished R&B artist Sylvia Robinson.
To the hip hop, the hip it to the hip hop. You don't stop the rocker to the bang bang boogie. Say up jump the boogie to the rhythm of the boogie to beat. Now what you hear is not a test. I'm rapping to the beat, and me, the groove, and my friends are gonna try to move your feet. You see, I am Wonder Mike, and I like to say hello. Up to the black, to the white, the red, and the brown, the purple, and yellow. But first, I gotta bang bang the boogie to the boogie. Say up jump the boogie to the bang.
So that is the Sugar Hill Gang's Rapper's Delight. Now, Sylvia Robinson's story is typical of its time, but it also echoes into the current era. In 1960, then at the age of 25, Robinson, half of the guitar and vocal duo Mickey and Sylvia, known for their million-selling song Love is Strange, walked into a recording studio in Manhattan to work with a New Orleans artist named Joe Jones on a tune he called You Talk Too Much. Now, she may have walked into that session as a recording artist, but she walked out of it as a record producer. Robinson received no credit for the session, one that, according to Billboard magazine, she had run on behalf of Jones's label, Roulette Records. Had she received credit for this work, she would have been formally recognized as the first ever black and female independent record producer to have a number 10 hit, or a top 10 hit. You Talk Too Much peaked at number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100. But instead, she became famous for another milestone, producing the first ever successful rap album, Rapper's Delight, released by the Sugar Hill Gang in 1979, transformed the street culture of rap into a commercially viable art form. The single, which I just played a excerpt of a moment ago dominated airwaves, sold more than 1 million copies, and riding high on that success over the next few years, Robinson went on to produce several pioneering rap and hip-hop acts and established her label, Sugar Hill Records, co-founded with her husband Joe Robinson, as one of the top independent record labels in America. Now, as much as the male hip-hop artists like Sugar Hill Gang are remembered today as the genre's main pioneers, it was Robinson who was responsible for bringing the sounds of the streets into the mainstream during the late 1970s. She was known then and is remembered today as the mother of hip-hop. Now, when we're thinking about women's contributions to music, evidence of gender equality in the industry still remains depressingly low. A recent University of California study called Inclusion in the Recording Studio looked at 700 albums from the Billboard 100 list between 2012 and 2018 and found that women barely made up 1/5 of recording artists, only 10% of songwriters, and a dismal 2% of producers. As the Grammys So Male hashtag campaign illuminated, when it comes to celebrating the industry's very best achievements, men have been vastly overrepresented in all categories of significance. Now, that same USC study also explored what sociologists call the lived experiences of women in the music industry. And by that, they refer to a representation of the experiences that women have, the choices that are available to them, and the knowledge they gain from these experiences. Now, over 40% of the 75 women who were interviewed for that study reported having male colleagues who dismissed or discounted their work or skills. 39% of them reported having experienced stereotyping or sexualization on the job, and a third described the music industry as male-dominated. When we think about gender disparity in an intersectional context, accounting not only for gender but also for race, the picture is even bleaker. Now, thanks to that USC study, we also know that of the 871 producers who contributed to those 700 Billboard 100 songs, only 4 of them, that represents 0.005%, were women of color. It also tells us that Sylvia Robinson's achievements were massive in significance. Now, all of this context is important for understanding why International Women's Day is still necessary, and why it's so important to shine a spotlight, to honor, to recognize, and celebrate the achievements of women in the music industry. Now, all this week, I'll be posting a new video highlighting some of my favorite women artists, singer-songwriters, producers, and engineers, and I'm going to commit to ensuring that future episodes of this podcast feature more women artists, singer-songwriters, and producers. Now, I listen to women musicians a lot. Some of my favorite albums by male artists were engineered or produced by amazing women. The Black Crowes' Shake Your Money Maker, Prince's Diamonds and Pearls, Tool's Undertow, Johnny Cash's Unchained, the Tibetan Freedom Concert LP, orchestrated by Beastie Boys, and so many others were all engineered by the great Sylvia Massey. But I realize in putting this episode together, I really don't highlight these achievements of women nearly as much as I should on this podcast. So I hope you'll watch the rest of this episode and stay tuned for some additional features I'll be adding each day this week and to future episodes of this podcast, which will feature more women artists. Now, for this episode, I'm going to focus on 5 artists that you should absolutely have on your International Women's Day playlist, and on any playlist, frankly. And we're going to get things going with one of Canada's most revered talents, trailblazer in the contemporary folk and jazz scenes. Joni Mitchell is, of course, one of the greatest feminist artists of all time. Her 1971 album, Blue, is one of those records that is indelibly burned into my own psyche and memory. So frequently was it played as a kid that it has become part of the cultural fabric of my own memory of growing up. It's folk rock brilliance, one of the greatest albums of all time. If you believe an NPR music critic, it is the greatest album of all time by a woman artist. You need this record in your collection. But if you only have room for one Joni album, it really, in my opinion anyway, should be Court and Spark. Now, this album, released in 1974, was Joni Mitchell's 6th studio LP. It was her first with Asylum Records after recording her first 5 albums, all of them fantastic, under the Reprise Records label. Court and Spark represented a shift from Mitchell's folk rock stylings to a more kind of progressive, rock jazz orientation, a genre she embraced and for which she is equally known and remembered not just for her many contributions and the many albums she produced, but also the innovative ways in which she fashioned her own unique sound, blending elements of folk, rock, pop, and jazz. Now, we're celebrating women artists with this episode, and Mitchell was more than just a remarkable singer-songwriter. She was also a producer and a sound engineer who tightly controlled the production of all her albums, from the arrangements to the selection of the instruments and the mastering. Now, Court and Spark delivered two of Mitchell's biggest radio hits, Help Me and Free Man in Paris, the latter which also features vocal performances by two of her closest collaborators and lifelong friends, former lovers, David Crosby and Graham Nash. Her vocals, the textures on this track are absolutely stunning. They are sonic masterpieces that will frankly never be duplicated or reproduced by any other singer in the way that she produced them. Now, not everyone loves Joni Mitchell, and I'll admit that I'm a kind of a late convert, to be perfectly honest. But no matter your musical preferences, there's no doubt about her place in the history of songwriting and in the history of popular music. If you're unfamiliar with Mitchell's discography, Court and Spark is, in my view, the best place to start. It's the most accessible place to start. And so let's have a listen to that album's arguably most recognizable track, one of Rolling Stone magazine's top 500 songs of all time, with backing support of Tom Scott's LA Express Jazz Band, referenced by Prince in the lyrics to his 1987 song Ballad of Dorothy Parker. It remains Joni Mitchell's only top 10 song to hit the Billboard Hot 100. This is Help Me.
Help me, I think I'm falling in love again. When I get that crazy feeling, I know I'm in trouble again. I'm in trouble, 'cause you're a rambler and a gambler and a sweet-talking ladies' man. And you love your loving, not like you love your freedom. Help me, I think I'm falling in love too fast. It's got me hoping for the future and worrying about the past. 'Cause I've seen some hot, hot places come down to smoke and ash. We love our loving, not like we love our freedom.
Now, that was Help Me by Joni Mitchell. It's the second track on side A of her path-breaking jazz rock album, Court and Spark, released by Asylum Records in 1974. Now, I'm going to shift gears in genres to highlight another fantastic album, this one by a band that has been pumping punk rock-infused rock and roll since the late 70s. Now, originally from Akron, Ohio, the incomparable Chrissie Hynde founded The Pretenders in 1978 after living in London for 5 years, writing for the music paper NME, which of course eventually became NME Magazine. Hynde formed and played in many groups during the mid-70s. She was there for the founding of the punk rock scene in the UK. She played in early incarnations of bands that would later better be known as The Clash and The Damned. Now, fronting a rock band demands an enormous amount of technical skill, confidence, and, with permission to use a gendered term on International Women's Day, showmanship. You need guts and drive to step up in front of your bandmates and command the attention of whichever audience you happen to be performing for on a given night. And when you're a woman and your bandmates are all dudes and it's the late 1970s and, well, fuck, you're going to have to give it everything you've got, and Chrissie Hynde has got it all. Navigating an industry that we've already acknowledged to be heavily male-dominated is no easy task. Doing it with mastery, with grace, and a kick-ass attitude, as Hine does, is nothing short of exceptional. She truly is a pioneer and a legend. She continues to be an ever-present force in the music industry. She released a terrific jazz album just a few years ago, hardly the genre you would expect from an artist whose signature look and sound blends choppy fringe, punk attire, and vulgar lyrics, along with rapid two-chord guitar jams. The Pretenders' self-titled debut contains several fantastic tracks: Precious, Space Invader, The Weight, Stop Your Sobbing, and Brass in Pocket. These are all, of course, standout songs. The album was produced by Nick Lowe, who also produced several albums in that period for Elvis Costello, The Damned, The Fabulous Thunderbirds, and others. This was a huge commercial success for the Pretenders, and it vaulted Chrissie Hynde near the top of the greatest front women of all time lists. Think about all of the great albums that were released in 1979, along with the Pretenders' eponymous LP. You've got London Calling by The Clash, The Cars' Candy-O, Elvis Costello's Armed Forces, and Highway to Hell by AC/DC. All of them, along with the Pretenders' self-titled debut, are classics in the rock genre. Now, it's hard to pick a favorite track from this album, but I'm going to lean into the punk ethos with its opener. This is Precious by the Pretenders.
The way you cross the street, 'cause you're precious. Moving through the Cleveland heat, how precious. You're taking nights and all the kicks are so precious. But you know I was shitting bricks, 'cause I ain't precious. Make me wanna, make me wanna, you made me make it. So mean. East 55th and Euclid Avenue was real precious. Hotel still incoming into view. How precious. It's a pity that you bruised my hip, 'cause I'm precious. You shouldn't let your manners slip. You're too precious. You make me wanna, make me wanna, make me make it, oh, something. Oh, we're gonna bound and bound and bound and bound and bound the show away. Oh, we want to do it, do it, do it, do it, do it on the pavement. Oh, maybe I'm gonna have a baby. Oh, we want to do it. Oh, we do it all night.
So that is Precious, the lead track from the Pretenders' self-titled debut album, released in 1979 by Warner Records. Now, 1977, Cream magazine wrote this about Fleetwood Mac frontwoman Stevie Nicks. Quote, "She is the most popular, most visible woman in rock, and she's a joke. She's an airhead, a puffball, a California girl prone to writing songs about witches, mysticism, and all the other shit one would conjure up while sautéing in a jacuzzi." In its 5-star review of Fleetwood Mac's Rumors, Rolling Stone managed to include this bit of misogynist shade. In reference to the band's huge single, the huge single from that album, the Nicks penned fantasy track Dreams, quote, "It's a nice but fairly lightweight tune, and her nasal singing is the only weak vocal on the record." Now, Dreams, it's important to note here, is still to this date Fleetwood Mac's only #1 song, and the band's legendary status in rock history is owed in no small part to the incredible voice, the lyrical contributions, and presence of the band's frontwoman Stevie Nicks. Also, fuck you, Cream, and fuck you, Rolling Stone magazine. Of course, Fleetwood Mac was already a decent British blues band long before Stevie Nicks and guitarist Lindsey Buckingham joined them in 1975. After Mick Fleetwood, the band's 6'6" drummer overheard a recording of the duo's terrific song, Frozen Love, while he was just hanging out at the famed Sound City recording studio in Van Nuys, California, while Nicks and Buckingham were recording tracks for their sophomore album, a follow-up to their self-titled debut, an album that was so bad, Polydor, their label, dropped them after only a few months into their contract. Now, a little sidebar here, Sound City was also the studio of which the producer and sound engineer Sylvia Massey, who I mentioned just a few minutes ago, worked. Now, at this time, Stevie Nicks was working on several songs that, had she not joined Fleetwood Mac, may have been lost forever, may never have been recorded, certainly would not have circulated as they have, and changed rock history in the ways that they did. Gold Dust Woman, Rhiannon, and Landslide. All of these songs were being written at the time just before she joined Fleetwood Mac, and these would all, of course, become huge Fleetwood Mac hits. Landslide, that gorgeous song, was composed as a solemn ballad by Stevie Nicks while she was spending time alone in Colorado, taking LSD for the first time, and listening to Joni Mitchell's Court and Spark on repeat, day after day, for weeks. Anyway, thank goodness for Joni Mitchell, for good timing, and for psychedelics, or Stevie Nicks may never have broken into the mainstream and gifted us with so much incredible music. Now, we're going to listen to some Fleetwood Mac in just a minute, but I want to note that after Nicks and Buckingham joined the band in 1975, Stevie really started to come into her own as an artist and gain control of her creative sensibilities and that monster rock star voice. Yet while she was coming out of her shell as a musician and frontwoman, her assertion of agency did not really translate into more creative control within the band. The record executive Danny Goldberg would recall after meeting Nicks for the first time back in 1976, quote, "I was astonished to hear that she had extremely limited clout in the context of the group. Although I and millions of other rock fans saw her as the principal star of Fleetwood Mac, she says that she was treated by her male bandmates as a space cadet, a chick singer. And still, this incredible singer was a crucial factor responsible for converting Fleetwood Mac from a decent blues act into a multi-platinum arena rock band. Her song Rhiannon was a smash from its eponymous album, and it gave the band the wind it needed to sail and help turn its next album, Rumors, into one of the most popular, best-selling records of all time. Now, final word about Stevie Nicks to Mick Fleetwood, who had this to say in the summer of 1976, after a set in which the band opened for the Eagles at Tampa Stadium. Quote, "As I looked out from my drum riser at the crowd, I realized I was looking at hundreds, no, thousands of girls dressed exactly like Stevie, in black outfits, many sporting top hats, Stevie's new stage costume, which they must have seen in magazines or on TV. At that point in our set, when Lindsey played the guitar intro to Rhiannon and Stevie stepped to the front of the stage, these girls went bonkers, swaying, singing along, and really giving themselves over to the spirit of the thing." Now, I planned on playing my favorite Fleetwood Mac song, Tusk, or even my second favorite, Dreams, but after that little vignette, how can I not play Rhiannon? You know the track. Let's have a listen.
You've
So that was Rhiannon, written by Stevie Nicks and recorded in 1975 by Fleetwood Mac on the band's self-titled album. This was Fleetwood Mac's 10th studio LP, but it was the first to feature Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham in the lineup. Now, when we talk about women in rock, and when we're making lists of recommended women artists worthy of our reverence and attention, we absolutely have to include Joan Jett. Founding member of the kick-ass 70s all-women punk band The Runaways and frontwoman of the Blackhearts, Joan Jett, born Joan Marie Larkin, is a pioneer who paved the way not just for women in punk rock, but for punk rock as a genre in its own. Now, I've mentioned already the Grammys So Male hashtag campaign, and although there are decades of underrepresentation still to overcome, the 2021 awards are offering a glimmer of hope for greater levels of gender equality and recognition of women artists. For the first time ever, all of the nominees for the Grammy Award for Best Rock Performance are women. Fiona Apple, Haim, Phoebe Bridgers, Big Thief, Grace Potter, and one of my favorites, Brittany Howard, have all been nominated. The winner will be a woman, and that's long overdue. Joan Jett, of course, can and has spoken to the inherent misogyny in rock music and the mistreatment of women artists. Her kick-ass song, Bad Reputation, was inspired by unsolicited advice she received from a music industry executive who tried to encourage her to act more ladylike by presenting an image of respectability rather than rebelliousness. In a recent interview with SiriusXM, Jett described that song this way. She says, "The way I look at it is Bad Reputation. It's not like I'm out shooting people or being bad. It's not a hurtful bad reputation. It's not bad in the sense that people think of the word bad," she said. "My reputation, if it's bad, it's for being strong. And my parents told me when I was 5 that I could be whatever I wanted as a girl. I could be anything. I believed them. I guess that's kind of bad, being able to say I'm going to do what I want and you can't tell me no, especially if I'm not hurting people." Now, this is the exact advice that I give my own daughter, and I'm still mindful of the fact that I don't really need to dispense that same advice to her twin brother, even though he also knows that he can do whatever the fuck he wants as long as he's respectful, generous with his time and attention for others, and that he gives everything of himself to his passions and pursuits. You know, want to be a hockey player, you want to be a gymnast, you want to be a dancer, an artist, a guitarist, a singer. I don't care. Just do what makes you happy. Do what gives you a sense of self-worth, as long as you're not hurting other people. If that's what it means to have a bad reputation, well, then may all of our daughters be badasses. Now, I don't have Joan Jett's self-titled 1980 solo release on which Bad Reputation appears, but I do have her second studio album and the first to be recorded as Joan Jett and the Blackhearts. I'm talking, of course, here about the 1981 banger I Love Rock and Roll, which tracked at number 2 on the U.S. Billboard 200 chart. Certified platinum in the U.S., 2 times platinum in Canada. Sold more than 10 million copies worldwide. This was a huge album. Included 2 top 10 singles, the title track, which of course everyone knows and loves, and Crimson and Clover. Both of those songs are actually covers. I Love Rock and Roll was first recorded by the Arrows in 1975 and was almost covered by the Runaways, except that they had just recorded a cover of Lou Reed's song, Rock and Roll, and as Jett explained in an interview a few years ago, the girls, by which she meant her bandmates in the Runaways, decided that it didn't make sense to cover 2 songs with the words rock and roll in the title. That's kind of an amazing little story. Anyway, Crimson and Clover, meanwhile, was originally recorded by Tommy James and the Shondells in 1968. It was a huge hit as well. Joan Jett was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2015. And at that induction ceremony, she performed Crimson and Clover and was joined by Tommy Jones himself in what is a highly memorable performance and a true display of musicianship. Go check that performance out on YouTube. It's great. Now, I love Rock and Roll, the song, but let's have a listen to that kick-ass studio cover version of Crimson and Clover. This is Joan Jett and the Blackhearts.
I don't hardly know
So that is Crimson and Clover by Joan Jett and the Blackhearts, released in 1981 on the I Love Rock and Roll LP by Boardwalk Records. I would come now to the final female artist that I want to feature on this episode in honor of International Women's Day. My first rock and roll crush, no question in my mind that Debbie Harry is the greatest frontwoman in music history. Before she redefined what it means to be a woman rock star, as the frontwoman of Blondie, she was a waitress, a secretary, a go-go dancer, and even a Playboy bunny. She epitomizes what it means to be badass. She's always been in total control of her story and her art. Debbie Harry is an absolute legend. Now, the all-male band that she fronted is called Blondie, but that was her moniker, the name she got catcalled during her service industry days, in which she quickly converted into her superpower. Blondie, the band, is of course made up of Debbie Harry as the frontwoman, as well as guitarist Chris Stein, drummer Clem Burke, and bassist Gary Valentine, and they captivated audiences in New York's nascent late 70s punk scene, much of it centered at Manhattan's CBGB Music Club. But those audiences were as captivated as much by the band's bombshell blonde star attraction as they were the band's overall energy and musicality. This is not just a Debbie Harry band. This is an outstanding band of high-quality, high-performing musicians and singers. Blondie became regular feature performers at CBGB, along with the Ramones, Talking Heads, Dead Boys, and many more important bands of that time and era. Now, Blondie was part of the cultural fabric of that grimy underground New York punk scene and the nascent new wave scene of the late 70s. But unlike other bands that never really made it out of New York, or which never really made the big time, Debbie Harry and the boys were serious musicians, and they seemed to make an almost effortless transition from the edge to the mainstream. I think it's fitting to spotlight Blondie and Debbie Harry for International Women's Day. Harry has always been an advocate for women's rights. She's not afraid to say what's on her mind, and in one of her more memorable quotes, she had this to say, quote, "The only place left for rock to go is toward more girl stars. There's nothing left for men to do. There's bound to be more male stars, but they can't express anything new." Harry's impressive vocal range, her innovative style, her fearlessness as a performer, all of this make her one of the most notable, fascinating, and beloved frontwomen of all time. She is a legend. Now, this is one of Blondie's best-known tracks. It comes from the band's 1978 album, Parallel Lines, and it is heralded as a key song by both the new wave and disco eras in which it emerged. I'm talking here, of course, about Heart of Glass. So that is Heart of Glass by Blondie off their 1978 album Parallel Lines. That album was released by Chrysalis Records. It was the band's third album. It peaked at number 1 in the UK and number 6 in America. It was a huge breakthrough for the band, moving them squarely into the mainstream. Now that does it for this episode of Groovescape, dedicated to celebrating the important contributions of women musicians, artists, songwriters on the occasion of International Women's Day. And It was tough to come up with only 5 artists to cover here. I could easily have added 5, 10, 15 more. Patti Smith, Grace Slick, Dolores O'Riordan, Susie Sue, Taylor Swift, Slater Kinney, Anna Nancy Wilson, Janice, Dolly, Susie Quattro, Carole King, Tina Turner, Aretha, Etta, Memphis Minnie, Ruth Brown, The Chicks, the list goes on and on. Check in again tomorrow and every day this week when I'll be releasing brief profiles of other important female musicians and artists that everyone should know and love, should include in their collection, should celebrate, especially, but not only on the occasion of International Women's Day. In the meantime, keep listening to your music, be good to each other, and stay safe.